He thought her job was a joke, a quaint little hobby she pursued while he conquered the corporate world. At a dinner with his closest friends, Mark didn't just mock his wife, Sarah. He belittled her, painting her as a naive dreamer in front of everyone who mattered to him. He basked in their sycophantic laughter, oblivious to the quiet storm gathering in her eyes. But the universe has a funny way of balancing the scales. The next morning, as Mark sat in a boardroom preening for his promotion, the door opened, and in walked his new CEO. In walked his wife. The clinking of wine glasses and the low hum of conversation at Veritas, a restaurant known more for its power broker clientele than its Michelin stars, was the perfect backdrop for Mark's casual cruelty. He held his glass of Cabernet Sauvignon aloft, a king addressing his court, which tonight consisted of his two closest friends, David and Thomas, and their respective partners, Jessica and Chloe. Opposite him, Sarah, his wife of 7 years, picked at her seared scallops, the vibrant saffron risotto beneath them, a stark contrast to the dull ache blooming in her chest. "No, seriously, Mark," said his voice, a little too loud, a little too slurred from the expensive wine. "You guys think you have it tough. You should hear about Sarah's big project." He made air quotes around the words, his lips curling into a smirk that she had once found charming, but now recognized as the precursor to a jibe at her expense. David, ever the sycophant, leaned in. "Oh yeah, what's the latest from the craft corner, Sarah?" he asked, a twinkle in his eye that mirrored Mark's. Sarah forced a tight-lipped smile. "It's actually going quite well, thank you, David. We just secured a new round of funding." Mark let out a bark of a laugh. "Funding? That's what she calls it." Her father, bless his cotton socks, probably got tired of her asking for a bigger allowance and decided to humor her. "It's a sustainable textiles company," he explained to the table, his tone dripping with condescension. She and her friend, another stay-at-home mum, are going to save the world one organic cotton tote bag at a time. The laughter that followed was a physical blow. It wasn't just Mark. It was the easy, unthinking cruelty of the people she had considered friends. Jessica, who worked in PR, offered a pitying smile. Chloe, a trust fund beneficiary who had never worked a day in her life, simply looked bored. Only Thomas had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and taking a sudden, intense interest in his steak. "It's more than just tote bags." Mark, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She refused to let him see how much his words cut her. "It's about creating a closed-loop system for textile recycling, reducing landfill waste, and providing ethical employment." She had practiced this pitch, honed it, delivered it to investors who saw the billion-dollar potential, not the quaint hobby Mark portrayed. The company wasn't some little side project. It was called Nexus Innovations, and it was her life's work. "Oh, ethical employment," Mark scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "You pay a few women in a community center to sew your little bags, and suddenly you're a titan of industry. It's adorable, really." He turned to the others, his voice conspiratorial. "She comes home talking about supply chains and market disruption. It's like she's playing a game of business Barbie. Meanwhile, I'm at Sterling and Finch, closing 8-figure deals that actually matter." The name of his company, Sterling and Finch, was dropped with the casual arrogance of a man who defined himself by his employer. He was a senior vice president, a title he wore like a suit of armor, and he never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of his importance. He saw the world in a clear hierarchy, and in his mind he was at the apex while Sarah was somewhere near the bottom playing in her sandbox of eco-friendly fabrics. "That's not fair, Mark," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous murmur. "You have no idea what I do." "Oh, I have an idea," he retorted, leaning across the table, his face flushed. "I have an idea that while I'm pulling all-nighters to keep this family in the lifestyle we enjoy, this dinner, this wine, your new car, you're playing with sewing machines and feeling good about yourself. It's a hobby, Sarah. A cute, expensive hobby. And that's fine. But don't pretend it's a real job." The finality in his tone, the utter dismissal of her passion and her hard work, was the deepest cut of all. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw a stranger. The man she had fallen in love with, the supportive partner who had once encouraged her dreams, was gone. In his place was a man bloated with his own success, a man who needed to diminish her to feel big. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation that Sarah couldn't bring herself to join. She retreated into a shell of silence, the laughter and chatter around her fading into a dull roar. She felt a profound sense of loneliness, an isolation that was all the more acute for being in a crowded room. As they left the restaurant, Mark, buoyed by the wine and the adulation of his friends, draped an arm around her shoulders. "Don't be so sensitive, babe," he murmured, his breath hot on her ear. "I was just having a bit of fun. You know I'm proud of your little project." But his words were hollow, a flimsy bandage on a gaping wound, as the chauffeur-driven car whisked them through the glittering city streets. Sarah stared out at the passing lights, a cold resolve solidifying in her heart. He thought her job was a joke. He thought she was playing a game. He had no idea the game was about to change. And he had no idea that she was the one who had just rewritten the rules. The new round of funding she'd mentioned hadn't come from her father. It had come from a consortium of venture capitalists who saw in Nexus Innovations the future of an industry. And that was just the beginning. The drive home was a silent one, a stark contrast to the boisterous atmosphere of the restaurant. Mark, sated and self-satisfied, quickly drifted into a wine-induced doze, his head lolling against the cool leather of the town car's seat. Sarah, however, was wide awake, her mind a whirlwind of hurt anger and a steely determination that had been forged in the crucible of her husband's mockery. As the car pulled into the driveway of their sprawling suburban home, a testament to Mark's success at Sterling and Finch. Sarah didn't wait for the driver to open her door. She slipped out the cool night air, a welcome balm on her heated skin. Inside the house was quiet, the air still. It was a beautiful house filled with expensive art and designer furniture. But tonight it felt like a gilded cage. She walked past the living room with its oversized white sofas and abstract paintings and went straight to her home office. This was her sanctuary, the one room in the house that was truly hers. Unlike the rest of the home, which had been decorated by an interior designer to Mark's specifications, this room was a reflection of her own taste and passions. Books on sustainable business practices lined the shelves. Fabric samples in a rainbow of colors were pinned to a large corkboard, and in the center of the room was a large, sleek desk, her command center. She sat down and opened her laptop. The screen illuminated her face, casting a blue glow in the darkened room. For a few moments, she just stared at the screen, the cursor blinking expectantly. Then with a deep breath, she began to type. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, not with the frenetic energy of anger, but with the focused precision of a general planning a campaign. For the past 2 years, Sarah had been living a double life. To Mark and their social circle, she was the dutiful corporate wife with a quaint little eco-hobby. But in the world of sustainable technology and high-stakes finance, she was a force to be reckoned with. Nexus Innovations. The company she had co-founded with her friend Amelia was far from the community center project Mark had so contemptuously described. It had started small, it was true, with a simple idea to create a biodegradable fabric from agricultural waste. But Sarah, with her background in chemical engineering and her MBA from Stanford, credentials Mark conveniently forgot to mention when he was belittling her, had seen the bigger picture. She had developed a proprietary process to convert pineapple leaf fibers into a luxurious, silk-like material that was not only sustainable, but also incredibly durable. She and Amelia had bootstrapped the company, pouring their life savings into it. They had worked out of Sarah's garage, for the first year their hands stained with dyes, their nights filled with research and development. Sarah had been the silent architect of the company's growth, her quiet demeanor belying a fierce ambition and a brilliant strategic mind. She had navigated the complex world of patents, secured initial seed funding from angel investors who saw the potential she exuded, and built a small but dedicated team of engineers and designers. The new round of funding she had mentioned at dinner wasn't just a small injection of cash from her father. It was a $30 million Series B financing round led by Viridian Capital, one of the most respected venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. And it hadn't been her father who had facilitated it. It had been her own relentless networking, her flawless pitch, and the undeniable strength of her company's technology. As she worked late into the night, reviewing spreadsheets and responding to emails from her team, Sarah felt a sense of liberation. The hurt from Mark's words was still there, a dull ache in her heart, but it was being overshadowed by a growing sense of purpose. For too long, she had allowed him to define her. She had downplayed her successes, hidden the true scale of her ambition, all in the name of preserving his fragile ego. She had thought that by making herself smaller, she could make their marriage bigger, but she realized now that she had been mistaken. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Amelia. "Everything is in place for tomorrow. The board has approved the final press release. You ready for this?" Sarah smiled. "More than ready," she typed back. "It's time." She looked at a photo on her desk. It was of her and Mark taken on their honeymoon in Tuscany. They were so young, so full of hope. A wave of sadness washed over her. She had loved him, she truly had. But the man in that photo was not the man who had humiliated her tonight. The man in that photo had believed in her, had seen her as an equal. The man she was married to now saw her as an accessory, a reflection of his own success. She knew that what she was about to do would change everything. It would be the end of their marriage as she knew it. It might even be the end of their marriage period. But it would be the beginning of her living her own life on her own terms. She shut her laptop and stood up, stretching her tired limbs. She walked over to the large window that overlooked the manicured lawn of their backyard. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, the first hint of dawn breaking through the darkness. A new day was coming, and with it, a new world order. Mark thought he was the king of his corporate castle. He had no idea that his queen had just orchestrated a coup, and she had done it all from the quiet sanctuary of her home office while he slept blissfully unaware in the next room. The next morning, the atmosphere in the penthouse boardroom of Sterling and Finch was electric. The air, thick with the scent of expensive coffee and even more expensive cologne, crackled with anticipation. Mark stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling city below. He felt a familiar thrill, the heady mix of power and adrenaline that came with his high-stakes job. Today was the day he had been working towards for the past 5 years. The CEO of Sterling and Finch, a venerable but stagnating investment firm, had recently retired, and the board had been engaged in a lengthy and secretive process to find his successor. Mark was the front-runner. As the senior vice president of acquisitions, he had been the firm's golden boy, the rainmaker who had brought in a string of lucrative deals. He was young, ambitious, and ruthless, qualities that were highly valued in the cutthroat world of finance. He had schmoozed the board members, wined and dined the key shareholders, and presented a bold vision for the company's future. He was confident that the announcement scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp would be a mere formality. His friend David, also a senior executive at the firm, clapped him on the back. "Ready for your coronation, Your Majesty," he grinned. Mark smoothed down his silk tie, a picture of cool confidence. "It's not over till the fat lady sings David," he said. But his own grin betrayed his excitement. "But I have to admit, I'm looking forward to redecorating the corner office." The other executives in the room offered their congratulations, their faces a mixture of genuine admiration and thinly veiled envy. They all knew Mark was the board's choice. He was the safe bet, the insider who would maintain the status quo while projecting an image of dynamic leadership. At precisely 9 a.m., the boardroom doors opened. The chairman of the board, a stern-faced man in his late 60s named Mr. Abernathy, walked in, followed by the other board members. They took their seats at the long, polished mahogany table. A hush fell over the room. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As you know, for the past several months, the board has been conducting a thorough search for the next CEO of Sterling and Finch. We have considered a number of highly qualified candidates, both internal and external. It has been a difficult decision, but we are confident that we have chosen a leader who will not only steer this firm through the challenges of the modern market, but will also position us for unprecedented growth." Mark's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. He straightened his tie, a triumphant smile already forming on his lips. "The board has unanimously decided," Mr. Abernathy continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, "that the new Chief Executive Officer of Sterling and Finch will be an individual who has demonstrated extraordinary vision innovation and a remarkable ability to build a successful enterprise from the ground up. This individual represents a bold new direction for our firm, a departure from the old ways of thinking, and a commitment to investing in the future." Mark's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the preamble he had expected. He had anticipated praise for his deal-making, prowess for his loyalty to the firm. This talk of a bold new direction and a departure from the old ways sounded less like a coronation and more like a revolution. And so Mr. Abernathy said, a dramatic pause, hanging in the air, "It is my great pleasure to introduce you to the new CEO of Sterling and Finch." The boardroom doors opened again, and in walked Sarah. She was not the Sarah that Mark had mocked at dinner last night. She was not the wife in the sensible dress picking at her scallops. This Sarah was a vision of power and authority. She wore a bespoke navy blue power suit that accentuated her tall, slender frame. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, and her face, though devoid of any visible makeup, radiated a confidence that was almost startling. She walked into the room not with the tentative steps of an intruder, but with the measured, assured stride of a woman who owned it. A collective gasp went through the boardroom. Jaws dropped, eyes widened. Mark felt the blood drain from his face. He stared at his wife, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. It was like a scene from a surrealist film. Sarah. His Sarah. The woman he had called Business Barbie was being introduced as the new CEO of his company. It was impossible. It was ludicrous. She walked to the head of the table and stood next to Mr. Abernathy, her calm, composed gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the executives. Her eyes met Mark's for a fleeting moment, and in them he saw not a hint of triumph, not a flicker of malice, but a cool, dispassionate assessment that chilled him to the bone. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the room's hidden microphones. "My name is Sarah Jenkins, and I am honored to be your new CEO." The silence in the room was so profound that Mark could hear the frantic, panicked thumping of his own heart. The world had tilted on its axis. The ground had opened up beneath his feet. The woman he had spent the last 7 years underestimating, the woman he had so cruelly belittled just hours before, was now his boss, his new CEO. And as he looked at her standing there in all her unexpected, terrifying glory, he realized that the joke, the real joke, had been on him all along. The shock that had paralyzed the boardroom slowly gave way to a cacophony of whispers and confused murmurs. Mark remained frozen in his spot by the window, his world having shrunk to the impossible figure of his wife standing at the head of the table. It had to be a mistake, a prank, a hallucination, brought on by a combination of ambition and expensive wine. Mr. Abernathy, seemingly oblivious to the seismic shockwave that had just ripped through the room, continued his introduction. "Sarah comes to us from Nexus Innovations, a company she co-founded and built into one of the most disruptive forces in the sustainable technology sector." He gestured towards Sarah, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. A presentation flickered to life on the large screen behind them. The Nexus Innovations logo appeared sleek and modern, followed by slides detailing the company's meteoric rise, its patented technology, its exponential revenue growth, its glowing profiles in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. Mark stared at the numbers, the charts, the headlines. It was all real. The little project, the craft corner, the Business Barbie enterprise, was a multi-million-dollar corporation on the verge of a global breakthrough. "As many of you know," Mr. Abernathy went on, "the board of Sterling & Finch has been looking to diversify our portfolio to move beyond our traditional investments and into the burgeoning green tech market. We've been searching for a company, to acquire a company that would not only bring us into the 21st century, but would become the new cornerstone of our firm." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "We found that company in Nexus Innovations, and as part of the acquisition deal, a deal worth 9 figures, we also acquired its visionary leader." The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place in Mark's mind with the force of a physical blow. The secret board meetings, the vague allusions to a major acquisition, the talk of a new direction. It had all been about this, about her. While he had been posturing and preening confident in his own ascent, the real power play had been happening in the shadows orchestrated by the one person he had never, not for a single moment, considered a player. He remembered her late nights in her office, the hushed phone calls, her frequent business trips that he had dismissed as social getaways with Amelia. He remembered her quiet confidence, her unshakable belief in her little project. It had all been there, right in front of him, but he had been too blinded by his own arrogance to see it. His friend David, his face pale with shock, leaned over to him. "Mark, did you know?" he stammered. Mark couldn't answer. He could only shake his head, a gesture of numb disbelief. No, he hadn't just not known. He had actively, willfully, and publicly denigrated the very thing that had now propelled his wife to the pinnacle of the corporate world, a position he had coveted with every fiber of his being. The irony was so bitter, so savage, it felt like acid in his throat. Sarah began to speak, her voice resonating with an authority that seemed both utterly foreign and yet somehow deeply familiar. She didn't talk about tote bags or community centers. She talked about leveraged buyouts, about market synergy, about the integration of Nexus's R&D with Sterling and Finch's capital resources. She spoke the language of power, the language of his world, but she spoke it with a fluency and a vision that he had never possessed. She laid out a plan for the company's future that was audacious, brilliant, and utterly convincing. The stunned executives who had initially been looking at her with a mixture of confusion and skepticism were now listening with rapt attention. They were seeing what the board had seen, what the venture capitalists had seen, what Mark had failed to see a leader. As she spoke, Mark's mind replayed the scene from the restaurant the night before. His own words, laced with derision and contempt, echoed in his ears. Business Barbie. A cute, expensive hobby. Don't pretend it's a real job. Each word was a fresh stab of humiliation. He felt the eyes of his colleagues on him, their gazes a mixture of pity, amusement, and a dawning, brutal schadenfreude. He had not only been a fool, he had been a loud, obnoxious fool, and he had done it in front of the very people whose respect he craved. The presentation ended. Mr. Abernathy beamed. "Any questions?" One of the older executives, a man who had been a rival of Mark's for years, raised his hand. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, his voice laced with a respect that had been absent just moments before. "Can you elaborate on your plans for the existing leadership team?" It was a loaded question, a polite inquiry into who would be staying and who would be going. Every eye in the room, including Mark's, was now fixed on Sarah. She gave a small, enigmatic smile. "I believe in talent, and I believe in results," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I will be spending the next few weeks evaluating every department, every portfolio, and every executive. My decisions will be based on performance, not on politics. The future of Sterling and Finch will be built on merit. Anyone who is committed to that vision will have a place on my team." Her gaze, cool and appraising, swept across the room, and for a second it lingered on Mark. In that moment he understood. This wasn't just a corporate takeover. It was a personal one. The woman he had mocked was now his judge, his jury, and quite possibly his executioner. The boardroom, which he had always seen as his arena of triumph, had become his courtroom, and he was the one on trial. The verdict was yet to come, but as he looked at the composed, powerful woman who was his wife, he had a sinking feeling that he had already been found guilty. The rest of the day passed in a surreal haze for Mark. The formal announcement was followed by a series of meetings, each one more excruciating than the last. He had to sit through a town hall where Sarah addressed the entire company, her poise and intelligence winning over a skeptical audience. He had to endure the forced smiles and whispered conversations of his colleagues, their curiosity about his marital implosion barely concealed. He tried to approach Sarah once, catching her in the hallway between meetings. "Sarah, we need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "My schedule is quite full today, Mr. Davies," she said, using his surname, a formal professional courtesy that felt like a slap in the face. "Please make an appointment with my assistant, and in the future all communications should go through the proper channels." She then turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the hallway, his world crumbling around him. The humiliation was a physical thing, a leaden weight in his stomach. He was no longer Mark Davies, the powerful senior vice president. He was just another employee, another subordinate subject to the whims and dictates of his new CEO, his wife. That evening he went home to a house that felt both familiar and alien. The opulent decor, once a source of pride, now seemed like a hollow mockery of his former life. He half expected Sarah to be there for them to have the screaming match that was surely brewing the confrontation that would clear the air. But she wasn't. The house was empty, silent. A note on the kitchen counter, written in her neat, precise script, informed him that she would be staying at a hotel for the foreseeable future. "It's best for both of us," it read, "and for the company." The next few weeks were a slow, agonizing descent into a new and terrifying reality. Sarah, or rather Ms. Jenkins, as he was forced to call her in the office, was a whirlwind of activity. She moved with a speed and a decisiveness that left the old guard at Sterling and Finch reeling. She restructured departments, slashed redundant projects, and brought in her own team from Nexus Innovations, a group of bright, young, and fiercely loyal executives who looked at her with a reverence that bordered on worship. Mark watched from the sidelines, his own power and influence diminishing with each passing day. His projects were scrutinized, his reports were questioned, and his authority was undermined at every turn. He was invited to meetings, but rarely asked for his opinion. He was a ghost in the corporate machine he had once helped to build. The cruelty of his situation was not lost on him. Sarah wasn't overtly hostile. She didn't fire him as he had half expected her to. Instead, she subjected him to a far more exquisite form of torture, the slow public erosion of his professional identity. She was killing him with 1,000 paper cuts, each one a subtle but painful reminder of his new diminished status. One afternoon, he was summoned to her office. It was the corner office he had so arrogantly coveted, now redecorated in a minimalist style that was a stark contrast to the old-world opulence of the previous CEO. Sarah was sitting behind a large glass desk, reviewing a document on her computer. She didn't look up when he entered. "You wanted to see me, Ms. Jenkins?" he asked, his voice stiff. "Yes, Mark," she said, finally looking up. The use of his first name was a surprise, a small crack in the professional facade she had so carefully constructed. "I've been reviewing the firm's portfolio. I'm concerned about the Kensington deal." The Kensington deal was his baby, a complex acquisition he had spent months putting together. It was supposed to be his crowning achievement, the deal that would secure his promotion to CEO. "There's nothing to be concerned about," he said defensively. "It's a solid deal." "Is it?" she asked, her voice deceptively mild. She swiveled her monitor around to face him. On the screen was a detailed analysis of the deal with rows of figures and charts. "Because my team has found some irregularities. It seems the due diligence was not as thorough as it should have been. The company we're acquiring has some significant undisclosed liabilities. If we had gone through with this deal as it stands, Sterling and Finch would have lost millions." Mark stared at the screen, his face turning ashen. She was right. He had been so eager to close the deal, so focused on the glory, that he had cut corners, overlooked red flags. He had been sloppy. I can fix this," he stammered. No, you can't, she said, her voice turning cold. Because I already have. I've renegotiated the terms, restructured the deal, and saved this firm from your incompetence. She swiveled the monitor back around. And that brings me to my next point. Your performance, Mark. It's been subpar. Your recent deals have been lackluster. Your reports are late, and frankly, you seem distracted. He wanted to scream, to rage, to tell her that the reason he was distracted was because his entire life had been upended by her Machiavellian machinations. But he couldn't. He was trapped. Effective immediately, she continued, her voice devoid of any emotion. I am reassigning you. You will no longer be the Senior Vice President of Acquisitions. Your new title will be Vice President of Special Projects. It was a demotion, a public shaming. Special Projects was corporate Siberia, a meaningless title given to executives who were being put out to pasture. You can't do this, he said, his voice a desperate whisper. I can, she said, her eyes like chips of ice. And I have. Your new office is on the 12th floor. Please have your belongings cleared out of your current office by the end of the day. She then turned her attention back to her computer, a clear dismissal. Mark stood there for a moment, utterly defeated. The woman he had married, the woman he had lived with for 7 years, had just professionally and personally annihilated him. And she had done it with the cool, detached efficiency of a surgeon removing a tumor. He walked out of her office in a daze. The walk back to his own office, the one that was no longer his, was the longest walk of his life. He passed his colleagues who averted their gaze, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The news of his demotion had already spread through the office grapevine. He sat down at his desk, the desk that had once been his throne, and looked around at the trappings of his former life. The expensive art, the photos of him with powerful people, the awards and accolades. It was all a sham, a monument to a man who had never really existed. He had built his identity on a foundation of arrogance and a sense of entitlement. He had defined his worth by his job title, his salary, his ability to dominate and control. And now, all of that had been stripped away. He was left with nothing but the bitter, humbling truth of his own mediocrity. And the even more bitter truth that the woman he had so foolishly underestimated was in every way that mattered his superior. The new world order had arrived, and he was its first and most prominent casualty. The move to the 12th floor was a swift and brutal confirmation of Mark's fall from grace. His new office was a small, windowless cube, a stark contrast to the expansive suite he had once occupied. The title, Vice President of Special Projects, was, as he had suspected, a euphemism for irrelevant. His days were spent on meaningless tasks, analyzing obscure market trends, and writing reports that he knew no one would ever read. He was a pariah, an object lesson in the new regime's intolerance for mediocrity. The evenings were even worse. The empty house, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a mausoleum. He would wander through the silent rooms, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that was no longer his. He saw Sarah everywhere. In the books she had left behind, in the faint scent of her perfume that still lingered in the air, in the half-empty coffee cup she had left on her bedside table that last morning. One evening, desperate for some semblance of human connection, he called David. His friend's voice was hesitant, guarded. "Mark, how are you?" "How do you think I am, David?" Mark snapped, his voice raw with frustration. "I'm in corporate hell. My wife has taken over my life, and my so-called friends have abandoned me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mark, what did you expect?" David finally said, his voice tinged with a weariness that bordered on pity. You treated her like dirt. Not just that night at the restaurant, but for years. We all saw it. We just didn't say anything. So you all just stood by and watched? Mark demanded, a fresh wave of betrayal washing over him. It wasn't our place, David said defensively. And besides, you weren't exactly open to criticism. You were difficult, Mark. You were so caught up in your own success you couldn't see anything else. The conversation ended on a strained note. Mark hung up the phone. The silence of the house pressing in on him. David's words, though harsh, had the uncomfortable ring of truth. Had he really been that blind? That arrogant? He began to sift through the wreckage of his memory, re-examining his marriage, his career, his entire life through the painful new lens of his current reality. He remembered the early days of his relationship with Sarah, her quick wit, her sharp mind, her quiet ambition. He had been drawn to her intelligence, her strength. But somewhere along the way, as his own career had taken off, he had become threatened by it. He had wanted a partner, but he had also wanted to be the star. And so he had unconsciously, and then consciously, begun to diminish her, to box her in, to turn her into the dutiful wife who wouldn't outshine him. He found an old photo album tucked away in a closet. He flipped through the pages, a montage of their life together, their wedding, their travels, their shared smiles. He saw a picture of Sarah on her graduation day from Stanford, her face radiant with pride as she held her MBA diploma. He had been there that day, and he remembered feeling a twinge of something he hadn't been able to name at the time. Now he knew what it was: envy. He had been envious of her brilliance, of her potential. And instead of celebrating it, instead of supporting her as she had supported him, he had tried to extinguish it. The realization was a gut punch, a moment of such profound self-awareness that it left him breathless. He had not just been a fool. He had been a monster, a small, petty, insecure monster who had tried to cage a lioness. A few days later, he received a formal inter-office memo. It was a summons to a meeting in Sarah's office. He walked to the penthouse floor with a sense of dread. He had no idea what to expect. Another demotion. The final merciful blow of his termination. He entered her office. She was standing by the window, looking out at the city, much as he had done on that fateful morning what felt like a lifetime ago. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, his voice subdued. She turned to face him. Her expression was not harsh or cold, as he had expected, but weary. There were dark circles under her eyes, and for the first time since her dramatic return, she looked vulnerable. "I've made a decision, Mark," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm selling Sterling and Finch." He was stunned. "Why you just got here?" "I'm not a corporate raider, Mark," she said, a faint, sad smile playing on her lips. "I'm a builder. I built Nexus from the ground up. I came here to integrate our technologies to create something new. But this place, it's toxic. The culture is rotten to the core. It's all about ego and politics, not innovation. It's your world, Mark, and I want no part of it." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I've received a very generous offer from a larger tech conglomerate. They want Nexus and they're willing to take Sterling and Finch as part of the deal. I'm taking the offer. I'm going back to what I love. I'm going back to building things." She walked over to her desk and picked up a folder. "This is a severance package. It's, generous. More than generous. It will be enough for you to start over." He looked at the folder, then back at her. "Sarah, He didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," seemed so ridiculously inadequate. "I know," she said, her voice softening. "I know you are." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time he saw not his CEO, not his nemesis, but his wife, the woman he had loved and the woman he had lost. "I didn't do this to punish you, Mark," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Not really. I did it because I had to. I had to prove to myself that I could, that I was more than just your wife, more than just a hobbyist. I had to reclaim my own identity." She walked towards the door. "The lawyers will handle the rest. I'm going back to the hotel to pack. I'm leaving tonight." And then she was gone. Mark stood alone in the magnificent corner office, the severance package in his hand. He was free. Free from the job he had come to hate. Free from the daily humiliation. Free from the ghost of his former self. But he had never felt more alone. He looked out the window at the sprawling city below. It was a city of ambition, of power, of reinvention. He had come to this city to conquer it. And in a way he had. He had reached the top only to find that it was a lonely, empty place. He had lost everything that mattered, his job, his friends, his wife. But as he stood there watching the sun set over the concrete jungle, he felt something else, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. A glimmer of hope. He had been stripped of everything, but he was still standing. He was a blank slate. He could be anyone, do anything. He had been given a second chance, a chance to build a new life, a life based not on ego and ambition, but on something real, something true. He didn't know what that life would look like or where it would take him. But as he walked out of the office for the last time, leaving the keys to his gilded cage on the desk, he knew one thing for sure: he would not waste it. The king was dead. It was time to see what the man underneath could become. 6 months later, the name Sterling and Finch was just a memory on Wall Street, absorbed into the behemoth of a tech conglomerate that had acquired it. The world of high finance had moved on its attention, captured by new deals, new dramas. For Mark, however, the world had slowed down. The sale of the company had left him a wealthy man, but the money felt like fool's gold, a consolation prize for a game he had spectacularly lost. He sold the house that monument to a life of hollow ambition and moved into a small, unassuming apartment in a quieter part of the city. He spent his days walking, reading and thinking, really thinking, for the first time in years. He was an archaeologist of his own life, digging through the layers of arrogance and insecurity to find the man he had been before the world of Sterling and Finch had consumed him. He reconnected with his estranged family, his parents and his sister, who had watched his ascent into the corporate stratosphere with a mixture of pride and unease. He apologized to them not just for his neglect, but for the man he had become. They were hesitant at first, but they saw the change in him, the quiet humility that had replaced the brash confidence. Slowly they welcomed him back into the fold. He started volunteering at a local community center, the very kind of place he had once mocked. He taught business skills to young aspiring entrepreneurs, helping them to write business plans, secure micro loans, and navigate the complexities of starting a small enterprise. He found a surprising satisfaction in it, a sense of purpose that his 8-figure deals had never given him. He was not just sharing his knowledge. He was helping people to build their dreams, a role he had so spectacularly failed to play in his own marriage. One afternoon, while browsing a bookstore, he came across a magazine. On the cover was a face he knew better than his own. It was Sarah. The headline read, "Sarah Jenkins, the visionary behind Nexus and the future of sustainable tech." He bought the magazine and read the article, a profile of her life and her work. It detailed the incredible success of Nexus since the sale, its expansion into new markets, its groundbreaking new technologies. The article painted her as a titan of industry, a woman who was changing the world. And it was all true. He felt a pang, not of envy, but of a deep, profound respect. He had been married to this extraordinary woman, and he had been too blind to see her. He was proud of her, genuinely proud. And with that pride came a deep and abiding sense of loss. He knew he had to see her, not to win her back, not to ask for forgiveness, but to tell her what he had learned, to show her the man he was becoming. He found her contact information through a mutual acquaintance and sent her a short, simple email. "I'd like to see you," it read, "to talk, if you're willing." To his surprise, she agreed. They met in a small, quiet cafe, far from the power lunch spots they had once frequented. She looked happy. There was a lightness to her, a sense of peace that had been absent during their tumultuous last days together. He told her everything, about his journey of self-discovery, about his volunteering, about the man he was trying to become. He didn't make excuses for his past behavior. He owned it, every ugly, selfish part of it. She listened patiently, her gaze never leaving his face. When he had finished, she was silent for a long time. "I'm glad you're doing well, Mark," she finally said, her voice soft. "I always knew there was a good man in there somewhere. He just got lost." "He was lost," Mark agreed. "And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. For not seeing you, for not supporting you, for not being the man you deserved." She gave him a small, sad smile. "I'm sorry too. I'm sorry I didn't fight for us sooner. I let you diminish me, because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't." They sat in a comfortable silence, the unspoken history between them, a palpable presence. The hurt was still there, a faint scar on both of their hearts, but it was no longer a raw, open wound. It was a part of their story, a chapter that had closed. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. "For the first time in my life, I don't have a 5-year plan. I'm just living, taking it one day at a time, trying to build something real." He looked at her, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "And you?" "I'm going to keep building," she said, her eyes shining with that familiar passion. "I'm going to keep changing the world." They finished their coffee and walked out of the cafe into the late afternoon sun. They said their goodbyes, not as husband and wife, not as CEO and subordinate, but as two people who had shared a life, who had hurt each other deeply, and who had, in the end, found a measure of peace. As he watched her walk away, a successful, powerful, and happy woman, Mark felt a sense of closure. He had lost his wife, his job, and his identity. But in the process, he had found something far more valuable, himself. He didn't know what the future held, but he was no longer afraid of it. He was the architect of his own life now, and for the first time, he was excited to see what he would build. The story of Mark and Sarah was over. But the story of Mark Davies, the man, was just beginning. That's the story of how a single dinner, a single moment of casual cruelty, unraveled a man's entire world and unleashed the hidden power of the woman he thought he knew. It's a story about ego ambition and the dangerous game of underestimating the people closest to us. But more than that, it's a story of redemption, of second chances, and of the incredible strength it takes to rebuild a life from the ashes of your own mistakes. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated or have witnessed the quiet strength of someone being overlooked, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next real-life drama. What did you think of Mark's journey and Sarah's ultimate triumph? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts.
Poor wife walks in on millionaire proposing to mistress. What she does next will shock you. When Maria Delgado pushed open the ornate doors to the private dining room, she was expecting a quiet evening with her millionaire husband, Jacob. Instead, she found him kneeling before another woman, an extravagant ring poised between his trembling fingers. In that split second, her world shattered like delicate porcelain dropped from a great height. Emotions warred inside her: shock, betrayal, fury. But what Maria did next defied every expectation. The consequences of that decisive moment would reverberate through high society circles, revealing secret alliances, shattered trust, and a woman's quest to carve her own destiny out of the chaos her husband had unleashed. Maria Delgado had been raised to believe in the power of love. Born in a modest suburb of Philadelphia, she'd spent her childhood studying hard, watching her parents work long hours, and learning the value of perseverance. Love, in her eyes, was meant to be honorable, a sacred promise that transcended time and adversity. So, when she married Jacob Delgado, an unassuming man at the time, who later skyrocketed to wealth, she believed their union was fated. Everything about Jacob back then spoke of ambition tempered by warmth, a thirst for success supported by a deep devotion to her. They married in their mid-20s, beginning with a modest apartment in downtown Philadelphia. While he climbed the rungs of the real estate development world, Maria supported them both by teaching music lessons to neighborhood kids. She beamed with pride each time Jacob closed a deal that brought them a step closer to his dream, building an empire. Through the nascent years of their marriage, every victory was shared. Every setback was consoled by the other. The couple felt invincible. As Jacob's fortunes grew, so did his interests, and the city seemed too small for his evolving ambitions. With the promise of even greater success, he uprooted them to New York. Over time, he transformed from the modest man Maria once knew into someone revered by the upper echelons of Manhattan's elite. He became known for orchestrating multi-million-dollar real estate ventures. Their modest apartment turned into a lavish penthouse overlooking Central Park. From dressing in simple button-down shirts to adorning himself in bespoke suits from Savile Row, Jacob thrived in the glitz and glamour of high society life. Maria was proud of him, of course. But with each acquisition, each expansion, each lavish party thrown by Manhattan's wealthy set, she began to sense something intangible slipping away. The sweet, humble spark in Jacob's eyes was being replaced by a relentless desire for more. Their shared dinners became fewer and fewer. Their conversations, once intimately about dreams and daily life, revolved around boardroom strategies and the constant hum of new deals. Where there was once closeness, an unspoken chasm was opening. Still, Maria was no stranger to sacrifice. She believed that a marriage demanded effort and understanding. She accepted that his time was consumed by meetings, power lunches with foreign investors, and charity galas where he networked. She made space for his blossoming empire and refused to let suspicion take root. If he was distant, she told herself, it was because he was tired. If his phone rang at odd hours, it was because that was how the real estate world worked. She clung to the memory of that earnest young man who held her hand in their first tiny kitchen, dreaming of a brighter future together. But all illusions can shatter. Late one evening, after one of his countless events, Jacob casually mentioned that he wanted to take her to an exclusive restaurant the next night, Belafonte's, perched high above the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the sparkling skyline. Maria's heart fluttered. A private dinner just for them, exactly what they needed to revive their bond. She felt a spark of hope that maybe their relationship could rekindle, that the old Jacob would re-emerge, if only for a night. The following day, she dressed with care in a flowing, emerald green gown. She recalled how green was Jacob's favorite color on her, how he'd often say her eyes looked like precious jewels when she wore it. She left their penthouse with trembling excitement, not wanting to arrive too early, but also conscious that the invitation had felt momentous, like something significant was in store. When she reached the restaurant, an attentive maître greeted her by name and led her down a corridor to a discreet, gold-trimmed door. Soft piano music flowed from within. Her heart pounded, imagining a candlelit room just for the two of them. Instead, as the door swung open, she stumbled upon a scene she could never have prepared for. Jacob, down on one knee, proposing to a statuesque blonde woman, his mistress, whose face Maria recognized from hushed rumors at parties and unconfirmed gossip in tabloids. The ring in Jacob's hand sparkled like a fallen star, captured by the overhead chandelier's light. Time froze, capturing her shock, the mistress's gasp, and Jacob's horrified expression in an excruciating tableau. Maria felt dizzy, her sense of reality splintering. Memories of their simple days in Philadelphia flooded her mind. Her hands shook as she clutched the handle of the door for support. She sensed the maître quickly slip away, likely to avoid the pending explosion. The look on Jacob's face rapidly morphed from romantic fervor to utter panic. How long has this been going on? Maria finally managed to choke out, voice trembling. The blonde woman, Annalise Winslow, as Maria would later learn, stepped back, her hand protectively covering the ring that Jacob had tried to slip on her finger. She had a deer-in-headlights look, as if she had expected this moment, but not in such a brutal collision of truths. "Maria," Jacob began, rising slowly from his knee, "it's not what it looks like." A pit of molten anger rose in Maria's chest. The anguish burned, pried open by betrayal. She glanced at the ring Jacob was holding. It wasn't a tiny diamond. It was a massive rock, overshadowing the modest ring she herself had worn with pride for years. Everything about this was a sickening confirmation of what she had refused to suspect. She refused to let him see her crumble, her eyes brimming with unshed tears locked onto Jacob's. "For once in your life," she said, voice trembling yet steel-edged, "tell me the truth." Jacob glanced between Maria and Annalise. Shame flickered across his expression, but only for a moment before resolve set in. In a voice that cracked, he said, "I was going to explain it after this. I never wanted you to find out this way." He was trying to speak gently, but Maria found it galling. Here, in a lavish, private dining room that cost more per meal than some people earned in a month, her husband was kneeling before another woman with an engagement ring. Her world felt false, illusions shattered like shards of broken glass. But instead of running, instead of screaming or hurling every insult she could muster, Maria inhaled. She decided then and there that she wouldn't collapse. Not now, not ever. With a composure that surprised even herself, she said, "Fine." She tugged off her wedding band, the simple gold band that had once symbolized their hopeful union. She placed it gently on the nearest table, right next to a silver platter meant for some extravagant dinner. She looked at Annalise, whose cheeks had gone pale. "Congratulations," Maria said icily. "You've caught a big fish. I hope you both choke on it." She turned on her heel, ignoring Jacob's pleas for her to wait. She walked out with her head held high, tears threatening to fall but refusing to let them out until she was out of that stifling, perfumed environment. Little did either of them know, Maria's next actions would set off a chain reaction of hidden truths, corporate betrayals, and unexpected alliances that would ultimately turn the power dynamics of their world on its head. Maria spent the night at a friend's townhouse near Gramercy Park. This friend, Jennifer Robertson, was one of the few people Maria trusted implicitly. Jennifer, a lawyer by profession, had seen far too many wealthy husbands try to con their wives out of rightful settlements. In the warmly lit living room, Maria recounted the horrifying scene. Jennifer listened quietly, her arms folded, eyes flashing indignation at Jacob's betrayal. When Maria finally finished, the tears she had held back since the restaurant began to slide down her cheeks. Jennifer promptly pulled her into a hug. "Maria," she murmured, "this is terrible, but you're not going through it alone. This time, you have to look out for yourself." Maria sniffled, still reeling. "I never thought. All those business trips, all those late nights." Jennifer tightened her grip. "People like Jacob, they think they can have everything. The wife, the mistress, the image of perfection. You don't deserve that." Maria wiped her tears. A cold anger took root in her heart, overshadowing her sorrow. She had sacrificed too much, believed in Jacob too long. Perhaps she'd been naive, but there was no time left for self-pity. "What do I do?" she asked, gazing at Jennifer. "I'm not going to just let him throw me away." Jennifer pursed her lips, then reached for her phone. "First, we need to call Patrick Hodges, one of the top divorce attorneys in New York. He'll know exactly what to do. The Delgado empire might have been built by Jacob, but you've stood beside him every step of the way. New York law won't ignore that." For hours into the night, they planned. Jennifer explained the complexities of high-asset divorces, the myriad ways spouses try to hide money. They dissected the financial empire Jacob had built, the real estate ventures, the offshore accounts rumored by some to exist, the charity foundations that he might use as tax shelters. Maria listened, took notes, and found her heartbreak morphing into a dogged determination. If Jacob thought he could so brazenly propose to another woman, he was in for a rude awakening. The next morning, Maria woke from a fitful sleep. She rose, showered, and dressed in a simple black outfit. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes rimmed with sadness, yet also lit by an undercurrent of resolve. She thought about that shocking moment in the restaurant. It had been mere hours since her life was turned inside out, yet it felt like an eternity. An unexpected wave of curiosity washed over her. What kind of woman was Annalise Winslow, beyond the honey-blonde hair and designer gown? How long had Annalise waited in the wings for Jacob to propose? Maria's mind churned with possibilities. Was she manipulated by Jacob's power, or was she the manipulator? Determined to cut through the speculation, Maria decided she wanted facts. She dialed a private investigator's number, someone recommended by Jennifer. A man named Richard Pine, known in certain circles for his thorough, discreet approach. Maria remembered meeting him briefly at a philanthropic event. He'd been introduced to her as the best man to find what's hidden. If there was dirt to be dug up, Richard Pine could unearth it. Within an hour, Maria was sitting in a small, upscale coffee shop near Union Square. Face to face with Richard, he was a sturdy man in his mid-50s, with kind but calculating eyes. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Delgado?" he asked in a measured tone, sipping his espresso. Maria inhaled slowly. "I found my husband proposing to another woman last night," she said, voice unwavering. "I need to know everything about her, her background, her motivations, any skeletons in her closet." Richard set down his cup, making the slightest grimace. "I'm sorry to hear that. Cheating spouses are unfortunately too common in my line of work. But let's talk specifics. What do you already know about this woman?" "Her name is Annalise Winslow. I believe she's from Los Angeles originally. She's in her mid-20s, definitely younger than me or Jacob. Rumor has it she used to be a model, or maybe a socialite. I'm not entirely sure." Richard nodded, scribbling notes. Understood. I'll compile everything I can find. Miss Winslow's finances, connections, travel history, job history, whatever might help. And I assume you also want me to keep an eye on Jacob's dealings? He lifted an eyebrow knowingly. Yes, Maria replied firmly. I have a strong feeling there's more to this than just an affair. I want to know if he's been hiding money or if he's planning to move assets out of the country. Anything that can help me get some measure of justice when we go to court, or even before that. Richard nodded again. I'll be in touch soon. Maria thanked him and left, feeling that with each step she was moving deeper into a labyrinth where she had to be the one calling the shots. She wasn't merely a scorned wife, she was becoming an orchestrator of her own destiny. By afternoon, Maria knew she could no longer avoid returning to the penthouse. She needed her clothes, her documents, her life. She braced herself for the confrontation that was inevitable. Summoning what courage she had, she took a taxi to the towering building that had once felt like a dream come true. Its gleaming marble lobby now felt foreign. She ascended in the private elevator, her heart pounding, stomach in knots. As she slid the keycard and the doors to the penthouse opened, she heard Jacob's voice carrying down the corridor. To her surprise, he wasn't alone. She recognized the female voice, Annalise. They seemed to be arguing. Maria took a moment to listen. Through the grand foyer, she could make out the two silhouettes in the living area. She heard Annalise's voice, tight with anger. You said you'd handle this differently. Now everyone's talking about it like some scandal. How do you think this makes me look? Jacob hissed back. You think I planned for Maria to walk in? God, Annalise, I'm juggling a million things. The board at Delgado Holdings is going to be furious if this leaks to the press. This was supposed to be discreet. Maria felt a twinge of savage satisfaction hearing the cracks form in their alliance. With her shoulders set, she stepped forward, letting her heels clack on the polished floor. Jacob and Annalise whirled around, identical expressions of shock distorting their features. Maria. Jacob started, lifting a hand in an entreaty, but Maria's gaze was locked onto Annalise. Up close, the mistress was undeniably striking tall, poised with carefully styled waves of golden hair. Yet Maria noticed a flicker of insecurity behind that controlled exterior. Good, she thought. I'm not the only one rattled. I just came to get my things, Maria said plainly. Then I'll leave, and you two can celebrate your engagement in peace. Annalise's shoulders relaxed, but her eyes narrowed in faint challenge. Jacob stepped forward. Maria, wait. I think we should talk. She laughed mirthlessly. Talk? That's what you wanted to do? You were going to propose to her, Jacob. Don't pretend there's any middle ground here. And honestly, what do I have to say to you? Congratulations. Jacob's jaw tightened. It's not that simple. Actually, it is, Maria snapped, her emotions flaring. You made a choice, a public choice no less. I can't undo that, and I won't be your doormat. Annalise crossed her arms, lips pressed together as though restraining herself from retorting. Maria caught the fleeting glance she gave Jacob, some mixture of fear and entitlement. It dawned on Maria that Annalise may have feared losing the security Jacob's fortune promised. The scorned wife's presence in the penthouse complicated matters for the mistress, who presumably dreamed of living here in style. Just take whatever you need, Jacob said after a moment. We don't need to fight in front of her. Maria's chest constricted, memories of 1,000 shared moments in this home swirling in her mind. But she suppressed the pain and moved calmly to the master bedroom, which was filled with expensive furnishings and the faint scent of the cologne Jacob once gifted her. She methodically packed a suitcase with her clothes and personal items. Her fingertips lingered on a framed photo of them in front of their first store-bought Christmas tree back in their humble Philadelphia apartment. She set it aside, not wanting to carry something so laden with nostalgia. As she re-entered the living area, she caught a glimpse of Annalise's engagement ring glinting in the afternoon light. Rage flared again, but she forced composure, reminding herself that she had a plan. Once she had everything she needed, she paused at the door, turning back to them. "Jacob," she said, "I've asked Patrick Hodges to represent me. If you want to avoid a scorched earth divorce, I suggest you speak to your attorney." Annalise's eyes flared at the mention of divorce. Possibly it hammered home the reality that Maria wasn't just going to vanish quietly. Jacob's face fell. He tried to speak, but words failed him. In that charged silence, Maria left. She felt hollow, but also strangely empowered. The woman who had walked in on her husband's betrayal mere hours ago was no longer the same. And what awaited her next was a labyrinth of hidden truths. Over the next week, Manhattan buzzed with rumors. The Delgado name had become a fixture of high society galas and philanthropic events. Whispers circulated through penthouse brunches, exclusive clubs, and midnight parties. Jacob Delgado had not only cheated on Maria, but had proposed to his mistress. The gossip columns ate it up. "Real estate mogul's secret engagement" was the headline in at least one online publication. People debated whether Maria was blindsided or complicit, whether she'd stay or go, and what the mistress was like. In the meantime, Patrick Hodges, the formidable divorce attorney, laid out a roadmap for Maria. They met in his sleek midtown office, with Jennifer present as moral support. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the hustle and bustle of Manhattan below, as though showing a world that never slept, never paused for heartbreak. "Maria," Patrick said in a calm, almost fatherly tone, "Jacob's net worth is estimated at around $700 million. We need to act fast to ensure he doesn't move assets out of reach." "700 million, Maria echoed, stunned, though she knew the figure hovered in that range. She had watched his success balloon over the years, but to hear it stated so plainly shook her. She'd never placed a dollar value on their relationship. Patrick continued, "We'll file motions to freeze a significant portion of his assets until the court rules on equitable distribution. But be ready, his legal team will fight. Also, the prenuptial agreement. We need to see if that holds up in court." Maria's brow furrowed. "We had a prenup, but it was signed before his empire expanded like this. Back then, he had almost nothing. I never thought it would come to this." Patrick flipped through documents. "Yes, it's from 15 years ago, but we have grounds to challenge it if certain conditions have changed significantly, or if you can prove undue influence or anything along those lines. After all, you supported him morally and even financially in the early years." Jennifer chimed in, "Don't forget about the potential hidden offshore accounts. Rumors are swirling that he might be moving investments to the Cayman Islands." Maria felt her insides twist. Every layer of betrayal deepened her resolve. "Let's do whatever it takes. I don't want to be cruel. I just want what's fair. But if Jacob tries to shortchange me after all I've done to help him, then I'm ready to fight." Patrick gave a firm nod. "I'll coordinate with your investigator, Richard Pine. We'll uncover any hidden income streams or suspicious accounts. In the meantime, you need to remain calm. These next few weeks will be a roller coaster." Maria exhaled. She glanced at Jennifer, who squeezed her hand. This was war, and she was prepared. Late one night, Maria's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She tapped it open and saw, "I have information about Annalise. Meet me at Calderwood Cafe, 9 am tomorrow. R.P. Richard Pine." She felt a rush of anticipation. The next morning she arrived at the cozy Calderwood Cafe, known for its artisanal pastries and discreet atmosphere. Richard sat at a corner table, leafing through a manila folder. Maria slid into the chair opposite him. "So, what have you found?" Richard leaned forward, voice low. "Quite a bit, actually." Annalise Winslow is from Los Angeles. That much is true. She started off as a pageant contestant in her teens, then moved into small-time modeling gigs, mostly promotional events. After that, she tried to break into Hollywood. She had a few minor roles, nothing significant. Maria listened intently as Richard continued. She married briefly at 19 to a man named Parker Bloom, an older talent manager. The marriage lasted less than a year, and she walked away with a sizable alimony settlement, allegations of emotional abuse from both sides, but nothing proven. After that, she moved to New York around 3 years ago. She's been living in high-end apartments, though it's unclear how she's been affording them. So she's a gold digger, Maria muttered, disgust curling in her stomach. Richard shrugged. She's adept at finding wealthy men, that much is clear. And from phone records I accessed, it seems she was seeing Jacob for at least a year before you caught them. Maria's chest clenched. A year. She felt her hands tremble momentarily. For a year, her husband had been living a double life. Go on, she prompted, forcing composure. Her finances are shaky. She maintains appearances, but she's leveraged with credit card debt, living off gifts from older boyfriends. I also found something else, some suspicion that she was previously connected to a money laundering scheme. Though nothing concrete enough for an arrest, she's cunning. She knows how to navigate the wealthy circles and keep her secrets hidden. Maria's mind spun. She pictured Annalise draped on Jacob's arm, whispering sweet words to him while systematically securing her future with his money. This was no mere fling. This was a calculated move by an opportunist. It didn't absolve Jacob, he was equally to blame, a grown man who should have seen the red flags. But it changed how Maria viewed the dynamic. How can I use this information, she asked. Richard folded his hands. Your legal team can introduce this as evidence that Annalise might be pushing Jacob to move assets, or that she might have a questionable background that affects the case. While it doesn't directly influence your divorce settlement, it can shed light on Jacob's credibility and motives. Maria nodded slowly. Thank you, Richard. This is incredibly helpful. She closed the folder, feeling her spirits lift for a moment. This was more than just heartbreak. Now it was a mission to protect herself from two cunning players. She had let love blind her to Jacob's changes, but she would not let it blind her to her own future. While the divorce proceedings were set in motion, Jacob Delgado faced a crisis of his own. The Delgado Holdings Board of Directors had caught wind of the scandal. The reason? A major investor, KG Nakamura, who had planned to pour hundreds of millions into Delgado Holdings' new project, was now hesitant. The fiasco with Jacob's personal life signaled instability at the helm, and big money despises instability. A week later, in the elegant conference room at Delgado Holdings headquarters, Jacob was grilled by the board. The walls were lined with modern art, and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. But the tension inside was palpable. Men and women in suits, representing some of the largest financial institutions, demanded answers. Board member Regina Charles, a tough-as-nails executive with silver-streaked hair, eyed Jacob coldly. "We're not here to judge your personal decisions," she began, "but your behavior is affecting our business." Mr. Nakamura is spooked. He stalled negotiations because he doesn't like the negative press associated with your, shall we say, public affair. Jacob attempted a confident posture. "We can handle this," he said. "Nakamura's concerns are about the stability of the company. I can assure you Delgado Holdings is stronger than ever." Regina's sharp gaze didn't waver. "Your wife, Maria Delgado, has been a visible figure at charitable events linked to this company. She was involved, albeit unofficially, in several philanthropic partnerships. Her departure in such a scandalous way raises questions. We need to ensure no crisis of confidence escalates. Jacob felt his insides tighten. The narrative was twisting. Maria was no longer just his wife. She was an extension of the brand he had built. He stifled the desire to lash out at the board's insinuation that his personal life was fair game. Instead, he insisted, I'm working on controlling the narrative. We'll handle the press. And as for Maria, once the divorce is settled, we can present a unified, amicable front. Regina's lips formed a thin line. Jacob, we hired a PR team. They've strongly advised that we do damage control before the next shareholders' meeting. That might involve statements from both you and Maria, something to quell rumors of a messy divorce that could sabotage investor confidence. Besides, have you considered the ramifications if Miss Delgado takes you to the cleaners financially? Jacob's frustration peaked. I have attorneys for that, he snapped. We'll handle it. The rest of the board members exchanged looks. One of them, Arnold Powell, tried to lighten the tone. Look, we just need reassurance that Delgado Holdings won't implode from a personal scandal. If you can't get it under control, we might have to explore leadership changes. That was the ultimate threat, a coup at his own company. Jacob forced a smile that didn't touch his eyes. There will be no need for that. Trust me. As the meeting adjourned, Jacob was left alone for a moment. His reflection in the glossy surface of the boardroom table looked older, more stressed. He thought of Maria's eyes the last time he saw her, brimming with betrayal. Then he thought of Annalise, upset with the negative attention. For the first time, he questioned if the precarious web he'd spun was worth the cost. But it was too late. The avalanche had already begun. In a twist that neither Maria nor Jacob could have predicted, help came from an unexpected quarter, Jacob's estranged sister, Daniela Delgado. She had parted ways with the family years earlier, after disagreeing with Jacob on a major business decision that led to a bitter falling out. Since then, Daniela had built her own path, creating a successful interior design firm. She'd always admired Maria's kindness from afar and held contempt for Jacob's ruthless ambition. Out of the blue, Daniela reached out to Maria. She called one evening while Maria was reviewing documents with Jennifer. Maria, this is Daniela, Jacob's sister. Maria's initial shock shifted into curiosity. Yes, Daniela. The first remember you. We haven't spoken in ages. Look, Daniela said. I heard about what happened. I don't blame you if you don't want to talk. But I have information about a couple of major real estate deals. Jacob's been working on things that might be relevant to your divorce. If you're interested, meet me at the Silverwood Lounge tomorrow night at 8. Maria hesitated. Jacob had mentioned Daniela only rarely, and it was always laced with bitterness. Yet something told her Daniela might be sincere. I'll be there, she said, surprising even herself. The next night, Maria walked into the Silverwood Lounge, a chic bar with velvet drapes and soft jazz music. Daniela, a petite woman with sharp features, waved from a corner booth. She wore a stylish black suit and maintained a guarded expression. Thank you for meeting me, Daniela said, offering a polite nod as Maria sat down. Maria studied Jacob's sister. I'm surprised you reached out. Jacob never said good things about you. Daniela smirked. Likewise. He painted you as the obedient wife who turned a blind eye to his shadier deals. But I knew that wasn't you. We might not have been close, but I always saw your kindness. Now, about his real estate dealings. She opened her handbag and pulled out a USB drive. These are documents that point to a series of shell companies linked to Delgado Holdings. I suspect he's been funneling money offshore. Years back, he tried to get me to help launder funds through interior design contracts. I refused, and that's partly why we fell out. He threatened me to keep quiet. Maria's eyes widened. She carefully took the USB drive. If these documents were legitimate, they could be a game changer. Why help me now? Daniela's eyes flickered with something akin to regret. Because Jacob's arrogance has gone too far. He's forgotten family loyalty and moral boundaries. If he wants to destroy you, the one decent aspect of his life, I won't stand for it. And, to be transparent, I want him to face consequences for all the times he's bullied and blackmailed anyone who stood in his way. Maria tucked the USB drive into her purse. She studied Daniela carefully, trying to gauge sincerity. "Thank you," she said eventually. "I'll have my lawyer look at this. I appreciate your honesty." Daniela gave a single nod. "Just be careful. He'll retaliate if he feels cornered. Jacob Delgado is still my brother, and I know what he's capable of." Fear nudged at Maria's heart, but it was overshadowed by her determination. She swore to herself that she wouldn't let fear rule her anymore. Jacob had shattered her trust and flaunted his betrayal in a way that threatened her entire future. She wouldn't stand idly by. While Maria gathered information, Annalise Winslow was not idle. She realized Jacob was in a precarious position. The negative press, the board's dissatisfaction, and now the looming divorce threatened to erode the luxurious future she had counted on. In whispered phone calls, she pressed Jacob to finalize their engagement, to secure her name in the Delgado fortune before it slipped away. Yet Jacob delayed, promising to fix everything first. Uncertain of Jacob's ability to protect her interests, Annalise took matters into her own hands. She arranged a private lunch with one of Jacob's longtime associates, a banker named Charles Montclair. He was known to handle offshore transactions for Delgado Holdings. At a chic bistro on the Upper East Side, she met Charles in a secluded corner. "Jacob trusts you, right?" she asked, swirling her wineglass. She wore a designer dress, exuding confidence, even though her heart pounded with nerves. Charles nodded slowly. "We've done business together for years." Annalise leaned forward, letting her voice drop to a conspiratorial whisper. "Good, because I want to guarantee that if things go south, I'm protected." Charles raised an eyebrow. "That's a tall order." Jacob keeps his financial dealings close to the vest. A sly smile tugged at Annalise's lips. "I'm sure he does. But I also know Delgado Holdings is possibly moving money in ways that aren't entirely above board. If you help me get a piece of the pie quietly, I'll make it worth your while. I have connections in L.A. that might interest you." Charles swallowed. He was no stranger to morally dubious requests, but this was bolder than most. Still, money talked. "What do you propose?" "I propose you set me up with an offshore account. A small percentage of whatever Jacob moves. I don't care if it's 1 million or 10 million, as long as I have something to fall back on. In return, I'll keep my mouth shut if the authorities come knocking." Charles looked uneasy. He glanced around to ensure no one was listening. This could be risky. "But I'll see what I can do." Annalise nodded, leaning back with a smug satisfaction. She felt a thrill at the prospect of securing her own fortune. She was tired of waiting for Jacob to deliver. If he was going to let his empire crumble, she'd salvage what she could. The divorce proceedings accelerated. Under the scrutiny of Patrick Hodges, Jacob's lawyers tried every trick in the book. They argued that the prenuptial agreement limited Maria's entitlement to a fraction of the current fortune. But Patrick introduced evidence that Maria's early support had directly facilitated Jacob's meteoric rise. Financial experts testified about intangible contributions, spousal support, and the validity of a prenup signed under potentially misleading circumstances. Behind closed doors, settlement negotiations were intense. One afternoon, in a wood-paneled conference room in the courthouse, Maria and Jacob faced each other while their lawyers sparred over details. The tension was suffocating. Jacob's lead attorney, Garrett Rhodes, glared over his wire rim glasses. My client is offering a significant settlement, $20 million. That's more than generous, given the prenuptial agreement. Maria's lawyer, Patrick, shot back. $20 million is a pittance compared to the Delgado empire. My client deserves equitable distribution, especially in light of the new evidence we'll be presenting about hidden assets. Garrett stiffened. What evidence? Patrick laid out the file containing Daniela's USB drive findings, shell companies, suspicious transfers, and potential tax evasion. Maria noticed Jacob's face flush with anger. She held his gaze, refusing to back down. "If you don't want the courts delving into these matters," Patrick said calmly, "it would be wise to offer a fair settlement and quickly." Garrett looked to Jacob, who cleared his throat. "This is ridiculous," Jacob muttered. "Maria, we can handle this privately. Let's not blow up everything we built." Maria's anger flared. "We didn't build anything together anymore, Jacob. You destroyed that. I just want what I'm legally entitled to, nothing less." Before Jacob could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, features hardening. "Excuse me," he said, rising and stepping outside. Maria exchanged a look with her lawyer, who gave her a reassuring nod. She felt a pang in her chest, remembering the man she once loved. But she'd come too far to yield. Moments later, Jacob returned, face grim. "There's a situation at Delgado Holdings. I need to attend to it. We'll resume this later." He left with Garrett, leaving an uncomfortable silence behind. Patrick exhaled and turned to Maria. "He's rattled. That's good. But we need to keep the pressure on." She nodded, her mind swirling with possibilities. Jacob had always thrived under pressure, but this was a new realm of stress, public scandal, bored dissatisfaction, a vengeful sister revealing his secrets, a cunning mistress, and a betrayed wife fighting back. If anyone understood the empire's vulnerability, it was Maria, and now she had no reason to protect it. Jacob discovered what the phone call was about. Keiji Nakamura had officially withdrawn his large investment due to the ongoing negative publicity and internal instability at Delgado Holdings. The blow was catastrophic. Stocks dipped, the board was livid, rumors of a hostile takeover circulated. Jacob's once iron grip on his empire was loosening. In the days that followed, tabloids feasted on fresh gossip. Leaked whispers suggested that Jacob's mistress was demanding a rush wedding and that the Delgado board was considering a forced resignation if the crisis continued. Jacob's face, once glowing with ambition, now appeared haggard. The carefully curated facade of success was crumbling faster than he could salvage it. At Annalise's insistence, Jacob tried to offer her a lavish ceremony in some exotic locale, hoping a quick marriage might quell some rumors and secure her unwavering support. But the board frowned at any attempt that would further sensationalize his personal life. An internal power struggle erupted, with some directors pressuring Jacob to step down temporarily. Regina Charles especially had sharpened her stance, aligning with a faction that believed Delgado Holdings needed a new figurehead to reassure investors. In a desperate bid to maintain control, Jacob made a public statement. Cameras flashed as he stepped before a cluster of reporters outside the Delgado Holdings headquarters. He wore a dark suit, face set in an expression of forced calm. "I would like to address recent speculations regarding my personal life," he began, voice subdued. "I am currently going through a divorce process, and I request privacy and respect during this challenging time. Delgado Holdings remains strong, and we are fully committed to our ongoing projects. The unfortunate withdrawal of Mr. Nakamura's investment does not diminish our stability." He continued with corporate platitudes, but the reporters clamored for more personal answers. "What about the mistress? Are you engaged already?" one asked. Jacob ignored it, reading from his carefully prepared statement. But the damage was done. In the public's eye, he was the faithless millionaire with something to hide. Watching the coverage from Jennifer's townhouse, Maria felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. She had loved that man once. Now he was a stranger, fighting to keep illusions intact. But illusions always come at a price. She reminded herself of that truth. As the divorce hearing approached, tension reached a fever pitch. Patrick Hodges received a call from Garrett Rhodes, requesting a private meeting, just the lawyers and their clients, with no media or court officials. Maria and Jennifer drove to the law firm's office, hearts pounding. They were ushered into a sleek conference room. Jacob, Garrett, Patrick, and a stone-faced Annalise were already seated around a polished table. Maria ignored the pang of seeing Annalise by Jacob's side. She focused on the fact that the mistress's presence was highly unusual in a divorce negotiation. Garrett cleared his throat. "We've come with a proposition. Mr. Delgado is prepared to offer a settlement of $100 million plus the Manhattan penthouse in exchange for Miss Delgado signing a non-disclosure agreement, no further revelations about Delgado Holdings or Mr. Delgado's personal affairs. We want to handle this quietly and move on." Maria's eyes flickered. 100 million was vastly larger than the initial offer. She glanced at Patrick, who gave a subtle nod, indicating it was a substantial proposition. Yet something felt off. Her gaze slid to Annalise, who looked uncharacteristically tense. Patrick spoke up. "It's a generous offer, but we need to verify if there are no further conditions. Also, the NDA's scope must be clarified. Miss Delgado has the right to discuss her personal experiences freely." Jacob cut in, voice sharp. "I don't want my ex-wife airing dirty laundry. We sign this. We end it. Maria, you go your way, I go mine." Maria's heart raced. 100 million could secure her future, free her from the stress, and let her start anew. It was a fortune beyond her wildest imagination back when they were newlyweds sharing cheap takeout. But then her gaze settled on Annalise, who avoided eye contact. Maria recalled the shady deals and the knowledge that Delgado Holdings was unraveling behind the scenes. She realized that if she accepted the offer blindly, she might be stepping into a trap, allowing Jacob to cover up potential crimes and injustice. She licked her lips, choosing her words carefully. "Jacob, I appreciate the offer, but I won't sign anything until I'm sure you're not hiding more. I don't need your hush money if it means letting you and Annalise ruin more lives." Anger flashed in Jacob's eyes. "You're letting bitterness cloud your judgment. Think of what 100 million can do for you." Annalise finally spoke, voice hesitant. "Maria, please. There's no need to drag this out. We can all walk away with dignity." Maria almost laughed at the irony of Annalise talking about dignity. Instead, she closed her eyes, remembering the heartbreak of that night at Belafonte's. Then she thought of the fear and manipulation that might still lurk if she let Jacob walk away scot-free. "I'll consider it," she said, "but I'm not making a decision today." Garrett, Jacob's lawyer, looked frustrated. "We need an answer soon. Otherwise, we proceed to court." "Then we proceed to court," Patrick replied calmly. "We'll see you there." The tension was palpable as they stood to leave. Jacob locked eyes with Maria. "Don't do this," he said softly, an echo of the old Jacob appearing for a split second. "We can solve this quietly." She met his gaze, seeing the man she once loved drowned out by layers of betrayal. "If you had wanted things quiet, you wouldn't have proposed to your mistress in a public place." The day of the official court hearing dawned cloudy and brisk. Photographers and reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Maria arrived with Patrick, Jennifer, and a small security detail. Whispers followed her. She was no longer just a betrayed wife, she was the woman who might topple a millionaire's empire. Rumors swirled that she possessed damning evidence of fraud. Jacob and Annalise arrived separately, escorted by their own legal team. People craned their necks to catch a glimpse, cameras clicking furiously. He looked tense, shoulders stiff under his tailored suit. Annalise kept her chin high, though she lingered behind Jacob, as if wary of the scrutiny. Inside the large, wood-panelled courtroom, the judge, a stern woman named Honourable Denise Faraday, called the session to order. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. On the surface, it was a high-profile divorce, but in reality, it was a battleground for corporate secrets, personal vengeance, and heartbreak. Patrick presented Maria's case with meticulous detail, her contributions to Jacob's early success, the suspicious financial maneuvers uncovered by Daniela and Richard Pine, and the emotional distress caused by Jacob's public betrayal. Garrett rebutted by citing the prenup, painting Maria as vengeful, seeking more than she deserved. Midway through the proceedings, Patrick introduced a surprise witness, Daniela Delgado. She stepped forward, looking poised and determined. Her testimony about Jacob's shell companies, backed by email chains and financial documents, sent waves of shock through the courtroom. The tension climbed higher when she revealed that she had confronted Jacob years ago about money laundering allegations, which he had vehemently denied. When cross-examined by Garrett, Daniela stayed firm. "I have no reason to lie," she said quietly, "other than to expose wrongdoing. My brother has threatened me, but I won't be silent anymore." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jacob's face was a mask of barely contained fury. For Maria, hearing Daniela stand up for the truth was both validating and heartbreaking. This was the family she once thought she had. Then it was Annalise's turn on the stand. She was visibly nervous, glancing repeatedly at Jacob for reassurance. Under Patrick's probing questions, she admitted to the affair, to Jacob's promises of marriage, but denied any knowledge of financial misconduct. She played the part of the innocent lover, insisting she merely fell in love with a man who claimed he was divorcing his wife. Patrick pressed, "Did Mr. Delgado ever mention, even indirectly, wanting to shift funds out of the country, presumably to protect them from the plaintiff?" Annalise hesitated, swallowing hard. "Not in so many words," she finally said. He mentioned wanting to make sure his money was secure." That small admission sent a ripple through the courtroom. Jacob's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. By the time Annalise stepped down, sweat dotted her brow. She cast a fleeting glance at Jacob, who looked away. After a tense lunch recess, the court reconvened. Garrett strode to the center, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "Your Honor, we have newly obtained evidence regarding Miss Delgado's own financial history, specifically questionable transactions in her name that raise concerns about her credibility." A hush descended. Maria's heart skipped. She had no idea what they were referring to. She quickly glanced at Patrick, who looked equally puzzled. Jennifer furrowed her brow. Could Jacob's legal team have found something contrived to discredit Maria? Garrett projected documents onto a screen. They showed wire transfers from an account titled M. Delgado to a bank in the Cayman Islands. The amounts were substantial, several $1 million. Maria was dumbfounded. She had never seen those transactions. "This is absurd," Patrick hissed. "Miss Delgado has no knowledge of these accounts. They must be fabricated," but Garrett pressed on. "Nevertheless, these documents indicate that Miss Delgado might have known about offshore practices and even participated in them. We must question her integrity and motivations." Maria's stomach churned. She realized this was a smear tactic, orchestrated to paint her as complicit or hypocritical. But how had they manufactured these records? The judge frowned, calling for order. "Miss Delgado," she addressed Maria, "do you have any knowledge of these transactions?" Maria stood, voice trembling but resolute. "None whatsoever, Your Honor." This is the first I've seen of these so-called documents. I suspect they're part of a scheme by Mr. Delgado to undermine my case." Jacob's eyes flicked toward her. Was there a flicker of regret or just determination to win at any cost? The judge instructed further examination of the evidence, and recess was called for the day. The media outside went wild, speculating on whether Maria was truly innocent or had skeletons in her closet. That evening, as Maria regrouped with her team, she tried to steady her nerves. Jennifer cursed Jacob's low blow. Patrick immediately launched an investigation into the suspicious documents, suspecting they were forged or manipulated. Meanwhile, Maria's phone buzzed with a text from Richard Pine. "Meet me at my office tomorrow at 7 a.m. I might have found something that can flip this around." Tension thrummed within her. She realized that she was dancing on the edge of a high-stakes game, one where illusions could be crafted and destroyed in an instant. She also sensed that if she didn't play her cards right, she could lose everything. The next morning, Maria arrived at Richard Pine's unremarkable office building in Chelsea. In a modest but tidy workspace, he greeted her with a firm handshake. On his desk, he had a laptop open to a complicated spreadsheet of IP addresses and account details. "I suspected those documents introduced in court were forged," he began without preamble. "So I did a deep dive into the digital metadata of the wire transfers. Every time a wire transfer is done, there's an electronic fingerprint. Long story short, the documents we saw in court have anomalies that suggest they were fabricated." Maria felt a surge of relief but also anger at Jacob's treachery. "So it's definitely fake," Richard nodded. "Yes, and I have proof. The IP addresses associated with these transactions trace back to a shell company that's linked to Delgado Holdings. The digital watermark indicates the documents were created using a specific software license registered to that same shell company. In simpler terms, it was an inside job." Maria exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders. She wanted to hug Richard, but she settled for gripping his arm. "This is exactly what we need. With this, we can prove they tried to frame me." Richard offered a faint smile. "Be careful. Jacob's cornered, and cornered people can be unpredictable. But yes, this should be enough to dismantle their smear campaign." Armed with this new evidence, Maria returned to the courthouse. Patrick introduced Richard Pine's findings, systematically debunking the false documents. The judge was furious at the apparent attempt to mislead the court. Garrett stammered that they'd obtained the documents from an anonymous source and had no knowledge of the forgery. Jacob looked livid, glancing at Annalise, who stared at the floor. The judge sternly reminded all parties that perjury and tampering with evidence carried severe consequences. In a decisive moment, she ordered a full forensic audit of Delgado Holdings' accounts. That spelled disaster for Jacob, who had spent years carefully disguising questionable dealings. It was the final straw that cracked his empire's shell wide open. When the courtroom resumed, Maria's legal team presented ironclad evidence that the so-called Cayman Islands bank statements in her name were forged. Metadata traced them back to a shell company tied to Delgado Holdings, proving Jacob's team had fabricated documents to discredit her. Furious at the deception, the judge ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of all Delgado Holdings accounts. Within days, the company's stock nosedived as investors panicked, and board members blamed Jacob for the ensuing scandal. Facing mounting pressure, they forced him to step down as CEO, leaving him humiliated and struggling to salvage his reputation. Simultaneously, Maria's divorce proceedings reached a turning point. Recognizing he was cornered by the damning audit and under threat of a potential criminal investigation, Jacob instructed his lawyer to extend a vastly improved settlement offer. Instead of the nominal amounts initially proposed, Maria now stood to receive $200 million, a portfolio of properties including the Manhattan penthouse, and an official acknowledgement of Jacob's wrongdoing. Crucially, the settlement would also include his public apology for using forged evidence against her. Desperate to minimize further legal liabilities and public shame, Jacob surrendered to every condition, though he seethed at the outcome. On the day the final documents were signed, Jacob approached Maria in the courthouse hallway, offering a halting apology that acknowledged his betrayal and, beneath that, his regret at how spectacularly he had destroyed their shared dreams. Maria accepted his words without malice, though the bond they'd once shared was irrevocably severed. Annalise Winslow did not appear. Rumors suggested she was already planning her exit, unwilling to remain at Jacob's side now that his empire was in shambles. With the divorce finalized, Maria stepped away from the chaos. Though she walked away with more money than she'd ever imagined, she remained grounded by the values her parents had instilled in her. Resolving to use her resources for good, she founded an organization to assist women rebuilding their lives after betrayal, separation, or financial struggles. Daniela, Jacob's sister, became a staunch supporter. Together, they furnished the charity's new office, forging a friendship born of mutual respect rather than shared loyalty to Jacob. Jacob's fall from grace served as a cautionary tale in Manhattan's elite circles, a parable of unchecked ambition leading to ruin. Free from his shadow, Maria embraced her next chapter on her own terms, moving into a modern penthouse across town, a space she chose herself. Not out of obligation, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Gazing at the skyline one late afternoon, she allowed the crisp air to fill her lungs, contemplating the journey that had challenged her faith in love and trust. Yet, in rising from the rubble, Maria discovered a powerful truth. Broken dreams could serve as the foundation for a more genuine, self-determined future. In the end, she transformed a devastating betrayal into an unbreakable will, resolved to live fully and authentically. Her story an enduring testament to resilience and renewal. And there you have it, the twists and turns of Maria Delgado's remarkable journey from unsuspecting wife to triumphant phoenix. She discovered the power of self-reinvention in the face of heartbreak and high-stakes drama, proving that even the deepest betrayals can ignite a fierce determination to rise. Jacob Delgado's downfall and Annalise Winslow's vanishing act became cautionary tales whispered throughout Manhattan's elite circles, while Maria's name was etched into the city's lore as a resilient survivor who refused to back down. She built a new life that honored her past, but never allowed it to define her future. If you've been hooked by this tale of scandal, reinvention, and triumph, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Help us spread the inspiration and let others know that even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance to step into the light stronger than ever. Together, we can celebrate stories of courage, resilience, and personal victory.